And today I'm delighted to welcome you to this special noontime lecture in our Scholar Series. Before we begin, I just want to acknowledge the generous support of Comrade Mercer Hall, who has endowed the VMHC's Scholar Series. Comrade serves as an honorary vice chair of the Board of Trustees of this institution and has been a champion of our work for decades. We also wish to acknowledge former VMHC President and CEO, Dr. Charles F. Bryan, whom this series also honors. Before we begin with today's program, I just want to make you aware of a couple of upcoming events here at the VMHC. So next week, we'll be hosting a special lecture on Thursday evening, celebrating Virginia's First Ladies. So come along and join First Lady Suzanne Yunkin and former First Lady Susan Allen, Ann Holton, and Pamela Northam as they discuss the role of the First Lady and their impact on the Commonwealth of Virginia. And to help us get this sneak peek, the notable author Heath Lee, who joined us just a few weeks or a month ago to talk about her new book on Pat Nixon, she's going to be here to moderate the discussion. So that's going to be a really special event. Then you can join us again next Wednesday, May 21st at noon, as we welcome longtime Richmond journalist Bill Lohman for a ride on Virginia roads less taken in search of interesting places, people, and pie, as Bill comes to speak on the latest edition of his book, Backroads and Byways of Virginia. So before we begin today, I just want to remind everyone to please take a moment to check your mobile phones. Please make sure they're switched to Do Not Disturb, silent, off. And if you would like to take pictures of the presentation, we just ask that you turn off the flash function to your mobile phone, just so we don't distract today's speaker. Today's speaker, retired Army Colonel Edna W. Cummings, joins us to share a life story that is as inspiring as it is improbable. Chronicling her successful path to leadership roles in the Army and afterwards, Colonel Cummings' memoir also tells the story of the 6,888th Central Postal Directory Battalion, known as the 6888, a trailblazing African-American World War II Women's Army Corps unit, now the subject of a Netflix film, and the grassroots campaign that Colonel Cummings led to honor them. In 2022, due in large part to her efforts, the 6888 was awarded the nation's highest civilian honor, the Congressional Gold Medal. Among the fewer than 200 recipients, including the crew of Apollo 11 and the Navajo Code Talkers, the 6888 is the only women's unit to receive this prestigious decoration. In A Soldier's Life, Colonel Cummings narrates her path from childhood to advocate and how she overcame incredible odds not only for herself, but on behalf of those who came before her. Colonel Edna W. Cummings served with distinction for 25 years in the US Army, culminating with senior level positions at Georgetown University, the Pentagon, and the North American Aerospace Defense Command and US Northern Command. Of course, today's lecture is doubly special as the United States and their allies across Western and Central Europe then and now commemorate Victory in Europe Day. The 6888 Battalion handled post for over 4 million military and civilian personnel, saving morale on the front lines. When they were disbanded in 1946, there was no public recognition for their service. It is Colonel Cummings' tireless work that has brought them the recognition that they deserve. So please join me in welcoming Colonel Edna W. Cummings.
Well, good morning. Well, 10 years ago, if anyone would have said, hey, you'll be standing at the podium at the Virginia History and Culture Museum talking about a memoir and efforts for the Congressional Gold Medal, I would have said, yeah, right. But here I am. But before I get started, I'd like to get an idea of the audience. How many veterans do we have here? Oh, awesome. Hope. All right. Army? Okay, that's where I'm going. All right. So thank you again for coming. A soldier's life my rise from Army Brat to 6888 champion. Basically, I was born with an ID card. So that's the only life I know. And for us veterans, we know that it's not a job, it's not a career, it's a lifestyle. We have our own language, we have our own way of interacting, and even for the family members of veterans, it's definitely a lifestyle. And what's interesting about my story, I have to quote actually the commander, Charity Adams of the 6888, and she, I'm paraphrasing, of course, you don't know you're making history until somebody tells you it's history. So for most veterans who receive awards and commendations, you just do what you know is right, you do your job, or anyone for that matter, not only veterans. And the 6888 for me is more than history. You see on the slide, it's my heritage. And heritage is a little bit deeper than history because when you read something that's historical, normally it's for two reasons. You want to become educated or informed about the topic, and you can connect with the story on some level. But once I became familiar with the story of the 6888, a group of African American women who served our nation during World War II, there were so many similarities. And what's interesting for me, I think military photographers pose military people the exact same way. So this is the commander, Charity Adams. She was a major at the time in the 40s. Here I am in the 80s. And we were holding our pens the exact same way. And so I thought it was some type of message from the universe. This is what you're supposed to be doing, but maybe it's just the military photographers. How do I get interested in the 6888? As I mentioned, I was an Army brat. I am an Army brat. My dad served World War II occupation force. He joined in 46 and was stationed in Italy for a while. And growing up, he didn't talk too much about his service, but I knew he served in Italy, and people called him a World War II veteran, which technically he is because he joined in 46. He's corrected everyone and says, no, I was in World War II occupation force. And that helped a lot because when I started studying about World War II, I knew that post-war there was an occupation force, and I paid attention because of my father. But one thing about mail is that connection. And fast forward World War II, today is Victory in Europe Day. 8 decades later, we're talking about the impact of the 6888 and why their service was so important to our nations and our Allied victory. Not only did the 6888 restore reliable mail service, they restored vital communication. And that's important. And now in the era of emails and text messages, we don't think a lot about mail. But if you stop for a moment, greeting card companies have not gone out of business. And some of you who have a mother who will celebrate Mother's Day, you know you have to get that Mother's Day card. And just imagine 80 years ago, not receiving mail for a couple of years, you on the front lines. And my mom kept some of my father's letters. I'm not sure, he was a Staff Sergeant E6 at the time. But the first letter is when he went to Vietnam in 1962 as part of the Advisory Team 4. And he was wounded severely and didn't think he was going to make it. But some of the letters he talks about his injuries, talks about being in the Philippines. And he went back again in 1969. This time he was with the Signal Battalion, 1st Cav. And these are just some of the letters. APO is Army Post Office Box, Army Post Office. So this was in the 60s, and I still have those letters. And when I was encouraged, is General Mary Kay Eater in the audience someplace? All right, General Eater wrote a book called Girls Who Stepped Out of Line, and we served in the Army together. And when I was talking about the 6888, she says, what's your story? And I didn't think my story was that compelling, but stepping back, looking at the 6888, looking at the importance of mail, and realizing the impact on mail with my family, letters that I still have now, mail definitely maintains that vital connection. And even in the 60s, that's the only connection that we had, unless he was able to patch a call through. So I learned radio telephone operator language very early as a child. He would call, Roger, over, out. I will not get too deep into that, but that's a chapter in the book where I talk about that. All right. As I grew up on military bases, we finally settled down in Fayetteville. He was stationed at Fort Bragg. And I was inspired by the women I saw in the Women's Army Corps. And I said, hey, I want to be a WAC, the Women's Army Corps. And yes, I was a member of the Women's Army Corps because the Women's Army Corps wasn't disbanded until 1976. And when I graduated from college, I was commissioned in the Women's Army Corps and detailed to the Army. So it was a separate branch of service, a separate branch within the Army until 1978. My first assignment was at Fort Rucker. That's the home of Army Aviation. And I was assigned to supervise flight school refueling operations. I didn't even know where my own gas tank was, let alone, true story, let alone one of a helicopter or a Huey or a Black Hawk. But while the students were training, that's what I had to do. That was my job. And I talk about that. So after Fort Rucker, I went to Korea. And you hear a lot about North Korea and South Korea. And I was stationed north in Uijeonbu, where the television show MASH was based on. So the cover image that I showed you, is also on the back of my book, was me in 1981 when I was in Korea. But what's interesting, this is my late husband here. The image here, and this is chapter 4 in the book, is actually a postcard. And these are North Koreans looking through the window. This is the United Nations Military Armistice Affairs Command flag. And as commanders, he was the commander of the joint JSA headquarters company, Joint Security Area. I still have that flag and there was, each commander got a table flag and they got cropped out. But this is a postcard. And this is my late husband in a meeting with the North Koreans, because that was part of his job to maintain the treaty, because the Korean conflict never ended. We only signed an armistice. So in chapter 4, I talk about Land of the Morning Calm. And that experience in Korea really shaped, I think, my understanding of the military and why we were there. This is an actual postcard. And here is North Koreans and my late husband meeting with the North Koreans, chapter 4, Land of the Morning Calm. And also in the appendix, I have a transcript of one of those meetings. And it was I believe it was a rock throwing incident, because the North Koreans would come to the border and just throw rocks at the Americans. And in 1976, there was something called Operation Paul Bunyan, where the North Koreans came across the DMZ, the demilitarized zone, and killed 3 Americans in 1976, to include my late husband's counterpart, Captain Boniface, who was killed in 1976. So he took over the command in 1980. Again, another image of me with my staff and Charity Adams. I believe, seriously, military photographers photographed us the same way. Pose, smile, have your staff behind you. But I just thought that was interesting. The bottom line is, the more I learned about the 6888, the more I saw similarities in my own life. All right. So from Army Brat, here I am as a cute kid. Simply adorable, maybe age 5, on active duty. And this was last Tuesday, the 6888 champion, where I had the opportunity to address the attendees and members of Congress at our Congressional Gold Medal ceremony, to actually present the gold medal. And I have the cutouts of the medal in the lobby. I believe you may have seen them, or you will see them at the conclusion. So the journey in between. And I encourage veterans, family members to take time to talk to people in your family, veterans, anyone over the age of 50, because there's a story there. And like most veterans, veterans really don't talk about their story, their lives, because they think that, hey, nobody will understand, no one would care. But there are some great stories and some good historical information that veterans have. How many people saw the movie, The 6888? Oh, great, fantastic. So you understand the framework about the 6888. During World War II, there were more than 7,000, including nurses, Black women who served in the Army as nurses. They served within the US primarily, but there was a problem, and I'll talk about that some more, with the male in the European theater of operations. I learned about the 6888 probably in 2015, 2016, just casually online. And I read about this commander named Charity Edna Adams. And I'm like, okay, a Black colonel named Edna. And in the movie, you saw where she said, "Over my dead body." And then she would often say things and do things and step back and says, okay, I'm going to get in trouble for that. Needless to say, I could connect to that story. But I got involved with the 6888 back in 2018. And we started with raising funds for a 6888 monument at Fort Leavenworth, Kansas. Now, Fort Leavenworth, Kansas was the home of the 10th Cavalry Buffalo Soldiers, the first Black unit post-Civil War, 1866. And some of the soldiers were buried there, they served there. And a commander, Philpott, who oversaw the construction of a huge Buffalo Soldier Park beginning in the 90s. And there's a flagship monument called the Buffalo Soldier Scouts Out. So the 6888 monument is at Fort Leavenworth, Kansas, and I was part of that team to raise money for the monument. So as we were raising funds for the monument, a filmmaker contacted our team and says, hey, let's do a documentary. And his name is Jim Theris, who works for the Department of Veterans Affairs and National Cemetery Administration, had completed a documentary about World War II women, the Hello Girls, who served under General Pershing and put millions of calls through. But when they came back from the war, the Army said, you were never soldiers. And the Hello Girls didn't get recognition as veterans until 1977. And recently, a Congressional Gold Medal was passed for them for restoring communications during World War I. So many people ask, what took so long? I think people now have the opportunity and ability to learn about this history and decide not only to write about it, but to do something about it. So Jim Theris, I helped him. I'm one of the executive producers of this documentary. It's on Tubi and Amazon Prime. This picture is the U.S. Ambassador Robert W. Johnson to the United Kingdom. When I first started advocating for the 6888 and raising funds for the monument and promoting the documentary as a way to get the word out about the 6888 and also about our efforts for a Congressional Gold Medal, I have a cousin at the time, she was about 27, she says, you need to get on social media. And I had no clue about hashtags and all that stuff and the ampersand hashtag, but I posted about the 6888 with the trailer. And so thanks to my 27-year-old cousin, true story, the public affairs person from the United Kingdom, the embassy, said, DM us so we can chat. And because of my cousin, I knew what DM meant. That means, wait, I skipped a step. It was follow us, DM us so we can chat. Yeah. So I followed and did a lot of that. Fast forward, the U.S. ambassador brought our production team over to screen the documentary throughout the UK for the 75th anniversary of D-Day. And also, they put up a blue plaque, which is a historical marker in the UK, at the King Edward School in Birmingham, England. So it's Birmingham, England, and Birmingham, Alabama. So it's Birmingham. And this is Gary Stewart, a Afro-Caribbean soldier who lives in the UK, who does heritage walks. And he actually traveled from the UK to the US to attend the ceremony at the US Capitol last week. All right. Senator Jerry Moran is from Kansas, and he attended the 688 Congressional Gold Medal. He was the co-sponsor, the lead sponsor for our gold medal. But Senator Moran also ensured that the 688 received their only award for performance, the Meritorious Unit Commendation. So in 2019, we were able to get the 688 their only performance award. And then the momentum built. We had the documentary, the Congressional Gold Medal was introduced. We had a Meritorious Unit Commendation. And little did we know it, that Tracy from the Army Women's Museum, the curator, Tracy, raise your hand. Higher. Tracy and her team suggested that Fort Lee was renamed after Fort Gregg Adams. So I think they just put the names for consideration for military bases. And the momentum, the history, fast forward in 2023, Fort Lee became Fort Gregg Adams. Actor Blair Underwood heard about what was going on with the 688, said this would make a great musical. So musicals in development. And of course, recently, the Netflix movie. So it just shows, and that's a chapter in the book, from a moment being the monument to a movement to honor this unit that no one had ever heard of. Even historians had never heard of the 688 because the mainstream media did not cover the stories of African Americans and other ethnic groups who served in the war, but the Black press did. And thanks to the efforts of the Black press, we have a lot of these stories. All right, how did the 688 become the 688? Many of you have seen the movie, and there's a scene where the commander says the 688 is going overseas. Well, the 688 did not become the 688 until they were overseas. Prior to that, they were unit Romeo Tango RT 510-C. So the unit was not named because the Army did not want to reveal any information about troop movement. So it was sensitive information. It was just the articles called them cargo. So the 688 did not become the 688 until March of 1945. Charity Adams graduated from Officers Candidate School in 1942, the first group of women to become Army officers in the Women's Army Auxiliary Corps that became the Women's Army Corps in 1943. So she was with the first group of women, 10% allocation for Black women. So 39 attended, 36 graduated. So Charity Adams had troop experience before she deployed overseas with this unknown unit on an unknown mission. But before deploying, she was also a recruiter. She traveled around the US recruiting women recruiting Black women to serve overseas. And that service was made possible by Dr. Mary McLeod Bethune, who was played by Oprah in the movie. Technically, Oprah could have been in a military uniform because Dr. Mary McLeod Bethune was also a general, an honorary general in the Women's Army for National Defense. So Dr. Bethune, or General Bethune, as I like to call her, and First Lady Eleanor Roosevelt encouraged all women to serve. And Dr. Mary McLeod Bethune also encouraged Black women to serve. And so the 688 was formed from the Women's Army Corps, the Army Service Force, and the Army Air Forces. During World War II, women had to have a higher educational level than men. Men didn't have to have high school diplomas, but women did. But with the 6888, 85% of the women in the 6888 were holders of college degrees or former school teachers. And why is that significant? Because in 1940, 64% of 24 to 30-year-olds didn't complete high school. So you had a group of women who were the best and brightest in the nation, regardless of race, regardless of gender, 85% holders of degrees or former school teachers. And what's also interesting, as I kept digging deeper into the demographics and the educational levels during World War II, 20 million eligible young men, 50% were rejected the first year, either for health reasons or illiteracy. In the movie, you saw where a lot of letters were just addressed to Buster Jr. That was probably the reason why, because of the literacy levels. Because people called family members, soldiers, by their nicknames, Buster Jr., Billy Bob, Joe, whatever. I love this map. In the movie, it talks of, you saw Kerry Washington mentioning how the troop movement and how to locate troops. This was an idea of, well, this is the map from the European Theater of Operations, 2 major battlefronts. The deadliest was the Eastern Front in this area. And so the troop movement, you think about 3 million troops, 7 million total Americans, all of that mail. And the mail had been stopped deliberately because mail contains sensitive information. So for a couple of reasons: D-Day preparations, logistical constraints, in other words, not enough vehicles to move the mail. So a lot of those vehicles had to be diverted for troop movement. But then just to move mail and to have, you saw my father's return address. You saw he was in the cavalry unit. You saw that he was in an advisory unit in Vietnam. That's sensitive information during an active engagement. So a lot of the mail was just stopped so we could focus on D-Day preparations. And so that map that Kerry Washington showed was, here's the actual map, which the movie did a very good job in capturing that, attempting to track troop movement. Some background about the mail operations or the mail situation. To our Army people and the other services, the Army is in charge of mail when troops deploy. So regardless of your service, Army, Navy, Air Force, Marine, Coast Guard, Space Force now, when troops are deployed overseas, the Army is in charge of the mail. So it's just not Army mail, all mail. And the Adjutant General of the Army is responsible for the postal operations. So the Adjutant General of the Army signaled to the leadership that we have a mail problem. And in the European Theater of Operations, Birmingham, England was the hub of operations, or where the Allied mail operations occurred. So 6888 was assigned to that particular area in Birmingham, England. But what I also located was this article from the Afro. About a month before the 6888 arrived in February. In January, there's a unit that offloaded 130,000 tons of mail in France, 130,000 tons, about 3,000 bags. And I remember when I located this article, I reached out to Tracy. I'm like, Tracy, we found actual evidence of the volume of mail. So that mail had been someplace backlogged. And this is in 1945. And this unit received a commendation just for offloading the mail. And I thought that was interesting. So it's, they didn't do anything else but take the mail off the ship or whatever. Yeah, to drop anchor in a liberated France. I thought that was interesting. I thought Tracy thought I was kind of going kind of deep. I'm like, Tracy, I got it. Because I'm not going to go. I put this in the book. I calculated each letter weighs about 0.4 ounces. per pound. And then I went on the postal site. Okay, one bag of mail is about 70 pounds, point four. And so each bag contains, so I stopped, Tracy stopped responding after a while. She's like, I got it, Edna. All right. Just to give an overview, the 6888 was regarded the best WAC unit in the Army. And this is a copy of a newsletter. Says Negro WAC Postal Unit performs one of the greatest jobs in the Army, a major said. So that was another evidence that in 1945, that the impact of the 6888 on the Army is recognized by the Army leadership. And what I did, I'm not going to read all of this, but I did the STAR format. Situation, task, action, result. I mean, I'm in the military, Army, that's what we do. We break everything down in that format. But basically, the 6888 processed 65,000 pieces of mail per shift, and estimate 3 shifts per day, some 8 hours. If you ever shift work, you know that a shift is not always just 8 hours. It could be 10 hours because you have shift change. But 195,000 pieces of mail at peak periods, because it would fluctuate, for an estimated 17 million pieces of mail and packages just in Birmingham, England alone. And this is a picture of the 6888 actually in France working. It's been disputed whether these men are actually POWs or civilian employees, because civilians also handle the mail alongside the 6888, and so did German POWs. And this was in Paris, but in Rouen, France, it was where the 6888 served. It was a concentration camp, and you'll see some images where we did a tour. And in Rouen, there's this facility, and it's still there, where the 6888 served. And Miss Indiana Hunt Martin, who provided this letter, said when she arrived at Rouen, there was a stench in the air, and she couldn't figure out what it was. And it's because of the concentration camp. That's probably where people had been, killed or murdered there, in various, facilities. So it was an intense time. And the 6888, even though it was not a combat unit, one thing about combat is not linear. Bullets don't care where you are. Bombs and bullets don't care. They will find you. And she said that in all of their areas where they had to work, especially in Birmingham, England, they had to dig trenches around the building. So if something happened, that they could jump in these trenches. But then she also said these trenches were multi-purpose, because people use them as restroom facilities. So she said if the bomb happened, she might just not jump in the trench. True. These veterans, I mean, that's the beauty of what I did. I had a chance to speak to so many of these veterans and their families and just get some of the nuanced history that we wouldn't get otherwise. So writing about history is one thing. I mean, you write about it, you have the facts, and there's some great books, but how do you advance the history? How do we make it relevant? How do we connect it to the public? So if there's an opportunity to elevate these individual stories and to commemorate the accomplishments, there's not only a foundation, but there's some type of advocacy and action with the foundation. One way is just by talking to family members. And this is Miss DeVetta, as I called her. I knew Miss DeVetta, and I did not know growing up that she served in the military. My mom didn't either. And my mom she turns 93 on Tuesday, whatever the 13th is, but anyway. When I started with the 6888, she said, check and see if DeVetta's picture, if DeVetta was in the unit. And she also gave me some other assignments about Miss DeVetta. That's why I'm kind of confused to kind of remember all the things she told me to do. But what I did, I started digging into the history of my mom's friend, because my mom said she went to Miss DeVetta's home and saw this image and said, well, who was that? Was that one of your relatives? She said, no, that was me. I was in the military. And this was probably back in the 90s. And we had no idea until she passed. I think it was 2002 or 2012. But anyway, Miss DeVetta was in the Army before she joined the 688 and was put in confinement because she refused to flip bed springs. And that's what would happen with a lot of the Black women who served. They were relegated to menial tasks. So that was part of the charge of First Lady Eleanor Roosevelt and Dr. Mary McLeod Bethune, was to give the women meaningful roles when they deployed overseas. And so when Mr. Vetta came back from the war, she retired from Fayetteville State University. She used a GI Bill, and that's something else that a lot of people don't know, that most of the 688 women use a GI Bill to continue their education. And I know at least in one instance, this lady got her father to co-sign for her, and she bought a home, which was unusual because women didn't get credit cards until 1974. So in the 40s, this 688 member was able to purchase a home. And she's buried at Fort Bragg Main Post Cemetery. Ms. Elizabeth Barker Johnson, another story. Ms. Johnson, 688, she was a truck driver before she joined the 688. And one thing about the 688, all of the women did not manage mail. They were not all postal clerks. 688 was a self-sustaining unit, so that was very true what you saw in the movie. They had to repair their own vehicles. They had to cook their own food. So just think of a small city, all those functions required of a small city, the 688 had to do that. So Ms. Johnson was actually a truck driver. But I met Ms. Johnson while I was at a meeting at Appalachian State. I'm a proud App State graduate. And when I went to a foundation board meeting there, I learned that Miss Johnson lived about an hour away. And so I met her and the family. It was her 98th birthday. And she said, I have one regret, is that I couldn't march with my class when I graduated. She was the first woman to use a GI Bill to attend Winston-Salem State University. And when she graduated, she already had a job, and the principal would not allow her to go to her own graduation. So 70 years later, I had a good friend, Dr. Afolayan at Winston-Salem State. Fast forward, she broke the internet because she accepted her college diploma in her Walker in 2019, and that's the image of her. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, she was really lively, and I even found out that she also took classes at Appalachian, so we had a special connection there. All right. This Indiana Hunt Martin, I told you about her refusing to jump in the trenches around the building. She was a very, very interesting. Talking with the daughter was pulling out all of these items. If you have a chance, watch our documentary. It's called 688. We did it in 2019. There's a section in there where Miss Indiana has a Ziploc bag talking about the Germans gave them a lot of junk. I mean, she's pulling out patches and spurs and all this stuff that she got from working with the Germans. And there was this nice jewelry box, says to Indiana from Gibson. So we said, who's Gibson? Gibson was a German POW, and he made a jewelry box for Miss Indiana that's now at the World War II Museum. And Janice, her daughter, had this all of these years and had no idea. She just thought it was junk, like her mom said. So Miss Indiana made her mark in Buffalo, New York, and Niagara. Before she joined the war, she was working in a facility that housed the Manhattan Project. So a lot of these women just had these interesting lives before and after the war. And in 2022, the president also signed legislation to have a post office named in her honor in Buffalo, New York, the Indiana Hunt Martin Post Office. So that's Miss Indiana. And she's also in the iconic photo. Her name was Hunt then. So there she is. Miss Millie Dunn Veazey. Miss Veazey is amazing. She's from North Carolina, and I'm actually going to North Carolina tomorrow to attend her post office dedication ceremony introduced by Representative Ross. So Miss Veazey came back from the war and used her GI Bill, got her bachelor's degree and her master's degree as well. But what's also interesting, she became very involved in civil rights. And so that's something that surprised me, the impact that so many of these women had on civil rights. And they were never really talked about. During the civil rights era, a lot of the leaders, to include Dr. King, traveled throughout the US, and especially in the South. They wouldn't stay in hotels. They would stay with different families. So Dr. King stayed with Miss Veazey's sister. And Miss Veazey also participated in a lot of the events, and she became the first female president of the Wake County NAACP in Raleigh, North Carolina. So that's Miss Veazey. And she said, I thought to myself that if those white women can do it, so can I. In other words, Charity Adams had the same attitude. She's like, just give me the training and opportunity. The movie really captured the essence of Charity Adams. She graduated from high school at 16, triple major at Wilberforce University in math, Latin, and physics. Yes, and when she left the Army, was discharged in 46, she was one of the highest ranking, everyone says highest ranking Black women. No, she was one of the highest ranking women. There was only one colonel's position in the Army during that time, and that was director of the Women's Army Corps. So Charity Adams says, I can do more on the outside to advance the causes I care about than I can in the military. And plus, she says she didn't want to go back to the Pentagon. She hated the Pentagon. She talks about there was a second lieutenant who got lost in the Pentagon carrying a baby, and by the time she found a way out, her kid had graduated from college. This is an idea. These women were incredible. All right. In 2023, I had the opportunity to lead a tour, a group of family members and supporters with Stephen Ambrose Tours. If you know Stephen Ambrose, I call him the Godfather of World War II. And he also has a tour company. His family manages it now, of course. And if you haven't seen Band of Brothers, please watch it. I like to call the 688 a band of sisters. But working with Stephen Ambrose, I am rather a tour guide. We're going back in October. And so what I wanted to do was recreate some of these images from the 6888. So this is Stratford-upon-England, the birthplace of Shakespeare. And this is Miss Indiana Hunt Martin's daughter here. This is Miss Johnson's daughter, the Winston-Salem State graduate. We recreated that photo. Cover of my book, Rouen, France, Joan of Arc Parade. We went to that site where Joan of Arc was buried at the stake. And this is the family members in Birmingham, England. So retracing their steps, June 2023, we are going back. If you just go online, Stephen Ambrose Tours, we're going back in October. The 6888 made an impact. I think there are now 2 blue plaques in Birmingham, England, one on Victory Square where the 6888 marched, and at King Edward School. There's also a street named after Charity Adams in Petit Quevely, that's near Rouen, and that's in France. So we attended that street naming dedication, and this is the mayor of Rouen, held a fantastic ceremony for us. All right. Normandy American Cemetery. There are over 9,000 graves at Normandy. 4 women, 3 from the 6888. And in one of the appendices in my book, I list all of the 138 African-American men to include their grave sites and the women from the 6888. Some of you have been to the Army Women's Museum. This is actually Kerry Washington visiting the museum after the production, and I believe she was impressed with the museum, and I think commented to Tracy that they got a lot of it right. So if you get a chance, go to Fort Gregg Adams. The Congressional Gold Medal, you will see the cutouts in the lobby. And Tracy and I were on the design team, so we helped devise the concept, the nation's highest civilian award, less than 200 since 1776. And the 6 AAA is the first military women's unit, and technically the only one serving in an active status with benefits to receive the nation's highest civilian honor. And that is legislation. The 6 AAA brought Congress together. Brief timeline. I know, that's why I think you talked about the improbable odds of this journey. The ceremony was absolutely amazing, but I will not read this timeline to you. Ukraine had just broken out when the legislation was passed, and so the president didn't have a signing ceremony, but the Speaker of the House did. Senator Moran addressed the floor, and we had a watch party in Representative Moore's office, who is our House Speaker. And of course, April 29th, we had the ceremony. And if you just go online, you can see the ceremony. That's Charity Adams' children, Speaker Johnson. And here I am, another moment that I thought, and this didn't make the book because the book was already in print. Maybe the next edition. Where's Nadine? But I really like this photo because it just shows how, for a moment, everyone agreed that this was the right thing to do for the 6 AAA. Major McClendon and Ms. Robertson, 2 living veterans. Quick story about Major McClendon. She was a first lieutenant with the 6 AAA, came back from the war, and she wanted to join again in 48. Went to the recruiter. The Air Force got her, and they asked her, "Where are you going?" She says, "I'm going to join the Army." She said, "You don't want to do that." So she retired from the Air Force in 1971, and she's 104. And I watched the 6 AAA movie with her, and her comment was, they said worse things than that to us. All right. So this concludes my presentation. I think we have time for a few questions, so thank you.
Hello. Thank you for your presentation. I just wanted to ask why they received a civilian honor if they were a military unit.
Well, several military units have received civilian honors, but the nation's highest civilian honor goes beyond military. It's an impact on the nation. And that's why it required 2/3 consensus by the Senate and the House and a presidential signature to elevate that level, because military, because we're a democracy, we fall under the civilian authorities. So if the nation's highest honor is awarded to an institution or an individual, that's an indicator not only did your contributions advance the military and its goal, it advanced the nation.
Colonel, the few times you appeared with uniform, I couldn't determine what branch of the Army you were in.
I started out in logistics, trained at now Fort Gregg Adams, so it's a full circle moment. And logistics includes petroleum operations like refueling helicopters.
In your research, did you ever come across any mention of censorship of mail, outgoing mail?
Yes, actually, the story about Charity Adams telling the general over my dead body, when I traveled to Europe and talked to some of the historians there, one in particular, this general, I believe was the inspector general, was going around inspecting censorship. And the 6 AAA did have a censor section where some of the mail was censored. That was an entire section. But this general who threatened to fire Charity Adams had already relieved a white major for handling mail improperly. So that was his job, to go around to inspect the mail and the entire operation. So just putting together that puzzle, the censorship, not only censorship, salvage mail, allied mail, was the entire operation. And the 688's force structure 855 was actually based on an Allied male unit. So I was, wondering why they came up with 855 women. So yes, long answer to a short question, but absolutely.
Hey, how you doing? I'm Ryan.
Hi, Ryan.
Hey, there was a scene in the Netflix movie where 2 women who were in service actually died in a bombing on the truck. Is that accurate, or was there more women that actually passed
Yeah,
while in service?
it was more women that actually passed, 3, and they died in Rouen, France, in the vehicle accident on the way back from an event. The vehicle, I'm not sure if it was a Jeep or whatever, it flipped over. 2 women died immediately on the 8th, and the 3rd died a couple of days later. So yeah, the women died, but they were not blown up in a truck.
Most of the pictures you see, and even in the movie, it was mainly letters. Were there large packages, or could you send packages through the mail at that point? And what mail were there packages, if in fact you could?
Right. I don't know the percentage of packages, but that was part of the problem. Packages were sent. Families were sending Christmas cakes, cookies, food, and that's what the rats were eating. So that's true story. So one, Miss Johnson, there's a story she tells where she picked up a package and it was falling apart. There was a watch inside, and she was able to look on the description on the watch and look at the locator cards with the last name and get the watch to the soldier. So families would send everything. And so, yes, packages were sent. The percentage, I don't know, but some of the image you could see packages, primarily the Christmas packages, and that was a source of morale. So that's the unit's motto: no mail, low morale.
Thank you for a very interesting presentation. I just wanted to let everyone know that I recently went down to Fort Gregg Adams to visit the Army's Women Museum. And it is an excellent museum, very well done, not overwhelming in size. The form you need to fill out to get on the base was very simple, not a problem. So I encourage everybody to go if you haven't been. It's an excellent museum.
Yeah, thank you. Tracy, stand up. So, yeah, the curator, Tracy Bradford.
Thank you. I just wanted to mention that Fort Gregg Adams is creating an enclave. You might have seen this in the news yesterday. So on June 13th, we're going to cut a ribbon, and you will now be able to get to the Army Women's Museum, the Quartermaster Museum, and several days to the Ordnance Training Support Facility. So if you check us out online, you'll be able to come onto the installation to the Heritage Enclave without going through the gate and that relatively simple, sometimes paperwork. So,
And Tracy also mentioned the online portal that has a lot of information about this history IT. So
sure,
can you
absolutely. So also, if you go to the Army Women's Museum website, you can link to a site that's called History IT. And with Edna's partnership, what we've done is the families really still are holding this history. It's not in the history books yet. So they've shared their personal collection. So you can go into this portal and actually look up the individual women and see their letters and their photographs and memorabilia that they have. So it's a really great way to kind of interact with that archival history yourself. And that's all online if you go to our website.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi again. Thank you for that presentation. I'm Ryan's mom. But a follow-up on the Museum for the Women's Army, is there an opportunity that there might be a special traveling exhibit, maybe to go to the National African American Museum that's in DC? Because they have traveling and special exhibits there all the time.
Well, the Congressional Gold Medal will be at the African American Museum, I was told, and there's a small exhibit to the 6888 on the 3rd floor. And Tracy, I don't know in terms of.
Right. So our plan is in 5 years, our exhibit will turn into traveling exhibit and be able to be
Yes, with all the DEI stuff that's been going on lately, have you seen anything about what we just talked about being removed? And also the renaming of a lot of bases. Is there a chance that Fort Lee will come back again, or will it stay?
So that's way above my pay grade. Hopefully, hopefully it will not be changed. And with regards to DEI, there was some concern about our ceremony, but the members of Congress, both sides, Senate, House, the two parties, embraced the history, talked about discrimination, racism. If you watch it on C-SPAN, the language has been altered, like on the Arlington website, Arlington National Cemetery. There were 13 or 14 women buried there. And Arlington did have a section that says notable African Americans. So now the 6888 other Black units and units of color or underrepresented units, they're now just prominent Americans. So, and that's okay, because the Congressional Gold Medal was not a DEI issue, not a DEI award. So for the 6888, I haven't seen a lot. The Army posted the articles. There's more emphasis on performance than color in a lot of the articles I've seen. So regardless of race or gender, these were outstanding soldiers. And that's the way a lot of the articles are written now. So I can see a softening, for lack of a better term, or some of the language, and the history is being embraced and is focused on performance, because at the end of the day, that's how we want to be regarded, not because of benign characteristics, but because of our performance. And so the 6888 Army, the United States Congress, other outlets mention it, even in the comments on the 29th. They were very open about discrimination, racism. No one hid behind that. And so that was, great to see and hear as well.
I think that's going to be all we have time for in terms of questions. But Colonel Cummings is going to be available in Commonwealth Hall immediately after the lecture to sign books and answer any more questions that you might have. So let's give Colonel Cummings another round of applause. And I got some good pictures.